you may kiss.
Look at the size difference. You can't be serious. Look at him. This is a joke. You'll regret this.
It's story time. In Nnewi, if laughter could pay bride price, this wedding would have been fully sponsored because the moment Chinelo stepped out with the shortest man in the village, people laughed in the market, laughed at the stream, laughed behind her back and straight into her face. Friends warned her, strangers mocked her, elders shook their heads, and everyone waited for her life to scatter quickly. But while the laughter grew louder, something else was growing quietly, and by the time the village stopped laughing, it was already too late to pretend they had not been watching. Before we go on, if you enjoy African folktales that begin with laughter and end with silence, hit the subscribe button and stay with me. In Nnewi village, news does not travel, it arrives. It arrives at the market before the owner of the story does. It arrives at the stream before the water pots are filled. It arrives at the palm wine joint before the sun begins to set. And the morning Chinelo walked beside Okafor openly, not hiding, not rushing, not pretending they were just passing each other by chance. The village received the news the way it always does, with laughter first, understanding later, if at all. Someone laughed loudly near the market stalls and said, is this one serious? Another woman covering her mouth laughed and said, Chineke, God forbid. One man shook his head and said, maybe not joke. Because in a place like Nnewi, where people measured men by posture and presence, where height was never spoken about directly but always noticed, Chinelo choosing Okafor felt like a story people did not know how to take seriously. Chinelo was not unknown. She was not loud, not flashy, but she was seen from a family people could not quite explain, a family that never competed yet never collapsed, a family that stayed out of trouble not by strength but by absence. They were always there and yet somehow not in the middle of anything. And Chinelo carried that same quietness, the kind that made people uncomfortable because it did not beg to be liked. Okafor, on the other hand, was known for the opposite reason. Known because people did not expect anything from him, from a family people pitied softly, not enough to help, just enough to lower expectations. And his height sealed that pity into certainty. People spoke to him kindly, but never seriously, laughed around him, but never with him. And when Chinelo chose him, the village felt as if a rule had been broken without permission. At first, the laughter was playful, jokes thrown like stones that were meant to bounce. Women at the stream said maybe she no see well. Youths laughed and said love no get height requirement. Men joked and said make she bend well to greet her husband. And Chinelo heard it all. She heard it clearly, but she did not answer anyone. Not because she did not feel it, but because she had learnt long ago that silence unsettles people more than defense. Her friends were not laughing loudly. Theirs was a different kind of mockery, the kind that wears concern like a rapper. They pulled her aside one by one, some in the name of advice, some in the name of sisterhood, asking her if she was sure, asking her if she had thought it through, asking her if she was not afraid of becoming a joke. And when she did not change her mind, the questions turned heavier. Do you know what people are saying? Do you know how this will look later? Do you know you are embarrassing yourself? Okafor heard the laughter too. He heard it when they passed, he heard it when they stood still, he heard it even when people tried to hide it. But he did not react the way people expected. He did not snap, he did not withdraw, he did not act grateful or ashamed. He simply continued, walking beside Chinelo with the same measured steps, greeting elders respectfully, avoiding long eye contact, carrying himself as if his dignity did not need confirmation. That steadiness confused people because mockery feeds on reaction, and without reaction, it becomes restless. So the laughter grew louder, the jokes sharper, the whispers more deliberate. The village needed Chinelo to flinch, needed Okafor to beg, needed something to confirm that the laughter was deserved. But neither of them provided it. By the time word spread that Chinelo was serious, that this was not a passing phase, not rebellion, not desperation, the village adjusted its tone. Laughter remained, but it gained weight. Men began to say marriage will show her. Women said time will teach her. Elders nodded and said youth does not listen. And the story of Chinelo and the short man became entertainment, something to discuss when business was slow, something to laugh about when nothing else was happening. And through it all, Chinelo continued, attending events with him, standing beside him without explanation, enduring the looks, the comments, the silence that followed greetings, because she understood something the village did not, that ridicule is often loud because it is afraid that a choice made without permission might be correct. What the village did not know yet, what no one bothered to ask, was why Chinelo never rushed her steps when Okafor walked slower, why she never spoke for him, yet never distanced herself, why she remained calm even when laughter followed her like a shadow, because the village was too busy enjoying the joke to realize that jokes once released do not always return the way they were sent. After the first wave of laughter settled into routine, the village did what it always does when a joke refuses to die quickly. It began to watch more closely. Not because it cared, but because it wanted confirmation. Confirmation that Chinelo would bend, that Okafor would shrink further, that time would embarrass them both into retreat. People stopped laughing only when they were close enough to listen. Women paused their gossip when Chinelo passed. Men lowered their voices and then raised them again once she was far enough. And the same friends who once joked openly now switched to softer tones, telling her they were only worried, telling her they were protecting her, asking her questions that were not really questions at all, questions designed to push her toward the answer the village preferred. They asked her how she planned to manage the future, how she planned to explain herself to her children one day, how she planned to carry herself as a wife when people would always be looking down. And Chinelo listened, nodded sometimes, smiled faintly when necessary, but she did not correct anyone because correcting people gives them importance. And she had learned early that the fastest way to end a conversation is to refuse to perform inside it. Okafor felt the shift too. The laughter had changed. It was no longer careless. It had become deliberate, calculated. People now measured their jokes, testing how much they could say before he reacted. Some greeted him exaggeratedly, bending slightly as if mocking respect. Others ignored him completely, as though pretending he did not exist would make him disappear. And still, he remained the same, greeting elders properly, stepping aside when needed, never forcing himself into spaces where he was not invited. That calm unsettled people more than anger would have, because anger justifies mockery. Calm challenges it. And soon, the village began inventing explanations. Some said Chinelo was proud. Others said she was stubborn. A few whispered that maybe she had been trapped, that maybe Okafor had done something she could not escape. Because in Nnewi, a woman choosing differently is rarely seen as choice. It is often treated as error. Her friends became fewer, invitations slowed, conversations shortened. She noticed how chairs were suddenly scarce when she arrived, how discussions paused mid-sentence, how laughter resumed only after she left. And for the first time, Chinelo felt the weight of isolation, not because she had lost people, but because she saw clearly how conditional their closeness had always been. There were moments she questioned herself quietly, moments late at night when she replayed conversations, imagined alternate paths, wondered what life would feel like if she chose approval instead of peace. And in those moments, Okafor noticed, not through words, but through stillness. He did not reassure her with promises, did not tell her everything would be fine. He simply stayed present, steady, reminding her without saying it that her choice did not have to justify itself to survive. The pressure reached its peak the day someone tried to save her. A man with the right height, the right voice, the right confidence, sent deliberately by well-meaning hands. He spoke loudly, smiled easily, praised Chinelo openly in front of others, making sure the village could see the contrast, and the message was clear. This is what you could have. This is what makes sense. And when Chinelo declined politely, the disappointment that followed was not private. It became another topic of discussion. People began saying she was wasting herself, wasting her future, wasting opportunities. And slowly, without noticing, they stopped asking why she chose Okafor and started asking how long it would take before she regretted it. Regret became the ending everyone was waiting for, the conclusion the village felt entitled to, because laughter without consequence feels unfinished. Through all of this, Okafor did not withdraw. He did not try to prove himself. He did not chase validation. He focused on his work, improved quietly, built consistency where visibility was absent. And though the village did not notice at first, something had begun to change. Not in status, not in wealth, but in posture. The way he carried himself remained unchanged, while others adjusted around him. Chinelo noticed the change too, not in the village but in herself. She became more certain, less reactive, less interested in explaining. She understood now that the mockery was no longer about Okafor, it was about control, about the village losing its grip on a story it thought it owned. And the more they pushed, the clearer her resolve became. By the time people began whispering that Chinelo was truly serious, that this part was not temporary, the laughter had lost its lightness. It carried expectation now, waiting for the moment something would go wrong. Because in a place where ridicule becomes prophecy, people begin to confuse hope for downfall with truth. By the time the wedding was announced, the village had already written its own ending, not with words, but with laughter sharpened by patience, because people had waited long enough for Chinelo to change her mind, and when she did not, they decided the ceremony itself would provide the proof they wanted. The announcement did not bring excitement, it brought curiosity, the kind that leans forward not to support but to observe. Women asked each other if they were attending, not because they cared, but because they wanted to see it with their own eyes. Men joked openly about standing close just to confirm the height difference. Youths laughed louder than necessary, already rehearsing the stories they would tell afterward. On the morning of the wedding, the village woke early, not to prepare gifts, but to prepare commentary. Phones were charged, jokes were loaded, eyes were ready, and as Chinelo dressed quietly in her family compound, there was no music loud enough to drown out what she already knew. That this day would not belong to her alone. It would be shared with every mouth waiting to taste it. Okafor arrived without drama, without entourage, without performance, dressed neatly, standing straight, greeting elders with respect. And though his posture did not change, the space around him felt different. People leaned in closer, measuring, comparing, confirming. Some smiled too widely, others looked away quickly, embarrassed by their own curiosity. The ceremony itself was small, deliberate, stripped of excess, not because they lacked means, but because Chinelo did not want noise to compete with intention. And still, the noise found its way in. Whispers floated between rows, laughter slipped through pauses, comments landed softly but carried weight. Someone muttered that marriage does not add height, another replied that love is blind but village eyes are not. Chinelo heard it all, not because she listened for it, but because mockery travels faster than music. She felt it brush past her ears, settle briefly in her chest, then pass. She did not react, not outwardly, but inside she registered every sound, every pause, every fake smile, every forced greeting that carried more curiosity than goodwill.
When vows were exchanged, silence followed. Not the kind that honors, but the kind that waits. Waiting to see if something would go wrong, if a stumble would confirm the joke, if embarrassment would finally arrive. But nothing happened. No misstep, no drama, no collapse. And that absence frustrated people more than failure would have. After the ceremony, as food was shared and guests moved around pretending to celebrate, the laughter returned, lighter now, relieved. People posed for pictures they would later mock, youth took videos, elders shook their heads slowly, saying, "Youth no dey hear word." Friends of Chinelo smiled politely and avoided long conversations, as if proximity might suggest endorsement. Some said openly that the marriage would not last. Others said quietly that time would teach her, and a few simply watched confused, because something about the calm unsettled them. The lack of visible regret disturbed the story they had prepared to tell. Okafor noticed the looks, the sideways glances, the pauses in conversation when he approached, but he did not shrink, did not overcompensate. He remained steady, speaking only when necessary, listening more than talking, absorbing the weight without letting it bend him. And that steadiness created discomfort because the village expected apology, not composure. As the day wore on and people began to leave, the laughter thinned, not because it had ended, but because it had exhausted itself. Jokes repeated began to sound dull. Mockery without reaction loses flavor. And by evening, the village returned to its routines, satisfied that it had witnessed what it came to see.
Chinelo left with Okafor without looking back, not triumphant, not defeated, just present, carrying with her the memory of a day that confirmed what she already understood, that public approval is often loudest where understanding is weakest. And as they walked away together, the village settled into a waiting silence, confident that time would eventually finish the joke it had started. Married life did not arrive with celebration. It arrived with routine. Chinelo and Okafor settled into days that looked ordinary from the outside. Mornings that began without attention, evenings that ended without commentary. And for the village, that ordinariness felt disappointing because they had expected struggle to perform itself loudly. Nothing scattered the way they predicted. No public quarrels, no rushed return to family compounds, no visible regret. And that absence confused people because ridicule needs confirmation to stay alive. And without visible failure, the story began to lose its grip. At first, nothing changed in Nnewi. Greetings remained short, laughter remained cautious. Chinelo noticed how conversations still paused when she arrived, how eyes still followed them briefly before looking away. But she also noticed something else, something quieter. The village was no longer shaping her thoughts. Their voices no longer followed her into sleep. The silence had begun to replace the noise. Okafor focused on work with the same discipline he had always carried. Only now, Chinelo stood beside him without distraction, encouraging without pressure, believing without announcement. And that stability created space for consistency, space for attention beyond the village, space for opportunity to find him instead of being chased. It started small, a picture taken casually, a short clip shared without intention, Chinelo laughing beside Okafor, unguarded, natural, posted by someone who found the contrast interesting, not mocking, just curious. And from there, the attention grew slowly, quietly, not in the village, but outside it.
Strangers commented, not with laughter, but with interest, asking who they were, asking where they were from, asking why they looked so calm together. And Chinelo watched this unfold with measured distance, not excited, not surprised, just observant, because she understood that validation from strangers carries less weight than judgment from neighbors, yet it moves faster. Soon, people began reaching out, not to mock, but to meet, to understand, to take pictures, to talk. Some came from nearby towns, others from cities, and with them came gifts, small at first, then generous, clothes, phones, offers, introductions, conversations that opened doors Okafor had never knocked on. The irony did not escape her. The same thing the village laughed at now attracted admiration elsewhere. The same calm that was dismissed as foolishness now read as confidence to those who had no history with their mockery. Okafor did not change, not in speech, not in posture, not in attitude. He accepted opportunities with humility, listened more than he spoke, learned quickly, applied himself fully, and the results followed naturally, not overnight, but steadily. Income increased, connections formed, respect grew without noise. Back in Nnewi, whispers returned. Not playful this time, not cruel either, confused. People noticed cars they did not recognize stopping near their compound, noticed visitors asking for Okafor by name, noticed Chinelo moving with a new ease, not pride, not arrogance, just assurance. And slowly, laughter disappeared, replaced by curiosity. Some tried to reconnect, pretending familiarity, asking questions masked as greetings. Others acted as though they had always supported the marriage, rewriting memory with smiles. And Chinelo observed this quietly, not confronting, not correcting, because she understood something now with clarity, that approval delayed is often dishonest. What mattered had already shifted, not in wealth alone, but in power, the power of indifference. The village no longer decided how her life should be interpreted, and that realization settled deeply, freeing, grounding, final. By the time the village fully noticed the change, it no longer knew how to speak about it, because admiration that arrives late never sounds confident. It stumbles, it hesitates, it carries the memory of laughter that cannot be erased. People in Nnewi began greeting Chinelo and Okafor differently, voices softer, smiles wider, respect forced into place like borrowed clothing. Some greeted too loudly, others avoided eye contact altogether, unsure which reaction would expose them less. And Chinelo saw it clearly. The shift was not affection, it was adjustment. Those who once laughed openly now explained themselves without being asked, saying they were only joking, saying they always believed love mattered more than appearance, saying things that did not match the past. And Chinelo listened without interruption,
because there is a kind of silence that records everything without response. Okafor's name began to travel differently, no longer attached to jokes, but to opportunity, to growth, to quiet success. People spoke of him with curiosity instead of pity, some with admiration, others with envy poorly disguised as interest. And still, he did not change. He remained measured, respectful, unmoved by sudden recognition.
Visitors continued to arrive, some seeking inspiration, others seeking proximity. Gifts were offered freely, not demanded, and with each interaction, the contrast grew sharper. The world beyond the village embraced what the village once dismissed, and that difference weighed heavily on those who had laughed the loudest. Chinelo did not celebrate the reversal. She did not replay the mockery aloud. She did not demand apologies, because she understood something the village was only beginning to grasp, that dignity does not require witnesses, and vindication does not always arrive with noise. There were moments she remembered the jokes, the whispers, the wedding day laughter that slipped between vows, and those memories did not hurt the way they once did. They served instead as markers, reminders of how quickly certainty collapses when built on judgment. Some friends never returned, some greetings remained strained, some conversations ended too quickly, and Chinelo accepted this without resentment, because distance often reveals who belonged only to a moment, not to a life. As for the village, it adjusted the way villages always do, quietly rewriting its role, speaking of Chinelo and Okafor as though the story had always been headed here, as though laughter had not preceded respect, as though mockery had not once felt justified. But Chinelo remembered, and Okafor remembered too, not with bitterness, but with clarity, and that clarity shaped how they moved forward, together, choosing carefully who stood close, who remained at a distance, and whose voices no longer mattered. In the end, the village did not learn through punishment, it learned through observation, watching a life unfold beyond its expectations, realizing too late that what it had laughed at was never weak, only unrecognized. And Chinelo and Okafor continued, not as symbols, not as lessons, just as people who understood early what the village learned slowly, that dignity does not announce itself, and respect, when delayed, cannot undo the sound of laughter that came before it. Chinelo never asked the village to understand her choice, and Okafor never asked the village to revise its laughter. Life simply moved forward without waiting for permission, and in that movement, the noise lost its power, the whispers softened into memory, the mockery aged badly, and what remained was a simple truth the village learned too late, that people who are secure in their choices do not argue with doubt, they outlive it. And in Nnewi, long after the laughter faded, the silence remembered who spoke first and who stood firm. If this story stayed with you, tap the subscribe button for more African folk tales that begin with laugh and end in silence. See you in the next one.